Hello, everyone. Today I am again speaking about one of the 8 meannesses of the heart that Sri Yukteswar talks about in his book, The Holy Science. And this one is race prejudice. And I spoke about this in an earlier video, but there's much more to consider about this topic, and so I wanted to delve more deeply into it today. When we think of the underlying principle behind that consciousness of race prejudice, what we find is a deep insecurity in the consciousness of the person who exhibits that prejudice. And that insecurity can feel like fear of the unknown, someone who's different. I remember one of the times that Dharmadas and I went to Russia to be with the Yogananda devotees there. And it was an interesting experience because it was such a different culture. And at the same time, the devotees, when we were together in our little retreats, it just felt like Ananda. It felt like home. And yet I remember being in the airport. I think it might have been Moscow, but maybe a different Russian airport. And there were people there from races that I had never encountered before. Some of them were very, very tall, and the facial structure was different, and I just felt like an alien. And so I can relate to that feeling of fear of the unknown. You just don't know what to expect. I remember when we lived in India, I realized that the facial expressions that I was used to reading on American faces were not the same across the board. Some of them were the same, but they were not always the same in India. They had different ways of different micro expressions that went across the consciousness that you could read in people's faces. So it was very much of an adjustment, trying to communicate, trying to understand, trying to relate. And I remember Swami, when we were in Italy once, pointing out that we're used to pouring from a pitcher into a glass this way. But if you are in certain parts of Italy and you were to pour the opposite way, like backhanded into a glass, it could get you killed. It's so insulting. So there's this myriad of different customs, different states of consciousness, different ways of relating, different ideas about what is right and what is wrong. And when we come to race prejudice, there's many, many ways of misinterpreting what another race is all about. And speaking of race, one of the interesting aspects of this is that there's a fear not only of the unknown with people, but there's the fear of they're going to take something that belongs to me, they're going to take my place, they're going to get there ahead of me, they're going to get the scholarship or get the money or get the job or whatever it is. It's viewed in a competitive way. And that reminds me of when we're driving on the freeway. Sometimes we're in a pack of cars that seems to be going very slowly. And so we try to get out of that pack and move on ahead in freedom. But what do we find? There's another pack of cars ahead of us. No matter how many packs of cars we can beat and get ahead of, there's always going to be more. So we have to think of that in terms of being afraid of other races getting there ahead of us or beating us out. There's always going to be something or someone or some group or something that's like artificial intelligence that's going to take all of our jobs and close down the factory. That's why we have to be secure in ourselves. That is the answer to all of these issues that come up and strangle the heart. All of these 8 meannesses are things that just are like ivy vines that grow all over the heart and constrict it and squeeze the life out of it. So Sri Yukteswar is pointing these things out to us so that we can dive deeply into our consciousness, into our hearts, and pull out those weeds that obscure the heart's natural love. So the answer is to become more secure in ourselves and to relax into ourselves, not give in to being in competition with other races, with other human beings, with other people, even in our own families. So many families I've known. I remember a friend of mine in India was telling me that his brother had waged a big lawsuit against him. And how sad that is when family members feel that they have to resort to that kind of legality. Another friend is engaged in something like that I think is very dharmic. It does depend. Sri Yukteswar himself had to fight lawsuits that were dharmic. But by and large, we need to feel so secure in ourselves that we're not in competition with other people and not afraid of them taking anything from us. I love that quote from Oscar Wilde. He said, "Be yourself. Everyone else is taken." And that's what we need to feel. I know I felt this with a friend of mine who has since moved up to Ananda Village. But every time I had a conversation with her and talked to her, she would reveal some new field of study that she had once engaged in. And so she knew quite a lot about a great variety of subjects. And I so much enjoyed talking with her. And I used to say, "You just amaze me. Never known anyone who's put out so much energy in so many different fields and was able to retain all of this knowledge." She's a kapha, so she could hang on to that. But that's the attitude that we have to have. Admiration and enjoyment for what other people have accomplished, who they are, the differences that make them unique. If we have this kind of inner security and just relax into who we are, what we've learned, what our karma is, and not indulge in jealousy of other people. You know, jealousy has never made sense, and I pray that it will always be this way, because our karma, each of our karma, is so hard won. We've grown, we've been challenged, we've overcome, or we've paid off the karma that we created. It's our very own. Why want or desire anyone else's karma? It's ludicrous. Why would you want that? That it may seem as though this person or that person is on top of the world, they have everything, but you wouldn't want to maybe feel the way that they do or have the struggles that they have. It's like impossible to really be anyone other than ourselves. So let's relax into that and enjoy and accept and be comfortable in our own skin, as the saying goes. And if we have that, then what follows from it is a desire to lift others up to their fullest potential, to encourage, to give support, to give love, no matter who they are, no matter what they look like. And believe me, race prejudice comes in all kinds of ways and colors. Think of all the terrible things that the United States government has done to indigenous tribes in this country. It's not good karma. I was talking to a friend the other day who was telling me about his home country in South America and the incredible race prejudice that happens there, specifically against indigenous tribes. In India, there's the caste system and a lot of prejudice there. A lot of our friends there were really trying to support the lower classes in ways that would help them to get an education, to live in a clean, hygienic environment. There's a lot of work to be done all over the world to help people to be lifted up. It's really obscene when you think of that 1% or whatever it is of the world's population that has so much of the world's wealth at their disposal. And it's one of the reasons why the Gates Foundation and other charitable works are trying to convince the very, very wealthy to share that with the world's less fortunate. So with race prejudice, let us remember also the principle of karma. So often, if we have an oppressor and we have the oppressor delights in enslaving and torturing and sucking the life out of oppressed people, and the oppressed are resentful. They look forward to getting even, and often then in the karmic view, when those two groups, the oppressed and the oppressor, are reborn, they switch roles. And so you find that very often with slaves and slave owners, it just bounces back over and over through the centuries. So in those sorts of situations, and we could experience it in our own lives if we are people of color or people of Italian background or Irish background or Jewish background. All of these groups have been oppressed in this country, had, terrible things happen. But there comes a point where someone has to just take a stand and say, no more. Swami had a dream once in which he and another man were engaged in this competition, and one of them did the other one wrong, and the other compensated and retaliated, and it kept going back and forth, life after life, until finally Swami just said, no more. And he said, I forgive you, and it's over. And that's what we finally have to do. We have to just forgive and let it be. It's also helpful to remember that slave consciousness is not limited to particular races or particular experiences. It's one of the lower strata of the spectrum of human consciousness. And certainly it plays out in very vivid and intense ways, with slaves actually being bought and sold and families being separated and all of that terrible, terrible consequences that come from this. But it can play out in more subtle, insidious ways too. Parents who seek to dominate their children is a form of enslavement. Bosses who try to work their employees with no respect, no dignity, no idea of how they would feel or what their needs are. People who take advantage of other people. And so we have to go into our own hearts and pull out all of those weeds and make sure there are no ways that we are seeking to enslave those who are dear to us, trying to bind them, trying to influence them to do how we want them to behave, to act in ways that we dictate. This is a subtle form of race prejudice. And so let us remember too that enslavement has happened from the beginning of time. Even Aristotle and many of the early Greek writers, Aristotle in particular, said slavery is natural and necessary. So you can see that this is a Kali Yuga consciousness. This is a way of thinking that's from the dark ages. We really need to eliminate this consciousness. And that's why it's coming out so strongly in these days of early Dwapara Yuga, because this is the time of cleansing. This is the time of shedding light on dark evils that have lurked beneath the surface, that people have not dealt with, they've not cleansed from their minds and hearts. And so now is the time to bring these things forward, to shine the light of discrimination, the right kind of discrimination, which means choosing the right consciousness, a discriminating nature, rather than race discrimination, where you're putting someone in a box and locking them there. We have to discriminate and see the value in every human being, because every human being does have value. And moreover, we need to expand that a friend of mine recommended the movie, which I have not seen yet, but I trust her judgment, and it's called My Octopus Teacher. And an octopus only lives for a short time. I think it's around 18 months. And yet, in this documentary, this person is showing how the little octopus had so much intelligence and so much knowledge and wisdom to share. So once we get over killing each other, fighting amongst ourselves and the human race, we need to broaden that humility and awareness so that we see that all creatures have innate value. We were talking earlier today, some friends and I, about how every cat that we know has a different personality. And that goes for other animals too. They are individuals. They often have herd consciousness and herd karma, but they are unique in themselves too. Each has consciousness, and we need to honor and respect that spark of divinity that is within all of us. And if we try to repress and suppress other races, anyone, I've been so inspired by the career and life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and how she fought for the right of women to be treated equally under the law. And as I was studying about slavery in early times, a lot of the slaves were women. And what I read said that the men were either ransomed or killed on the battlefield. And so enslavement of women happens even to this day. There is human trafficking for both men and women. And that slavery has to come to an end. We have to stand up and help all people to have the right to live in freedom, to live in the light. And let us pray that this great country of America can find its way to be secure in ourselves, each individual, secure and comfortable, and striving always to grow and learn and change and be flexible and be curious and learning new things all the time so that we're not afraid to accept other people. And we're not afraid to lift them up, to cheer them on, to care that each child of God find his or her own way into freedom and joy and light. We are headed for a new age. And let us embrace that new age, first of all in ourselves, eradicating the meannesses of the heart so that we can be fully alive as children of God.